excited to have the Senior VP of Zenefits here to join me on the fireside chat. Great. Colin, welcome. Okay.
So nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So some fun fact about Colin is that he loves to do sailing in this.
I don't know how fun that is, but I do like to sail. Yeah. I did live on a sailboat for a couple of years too here in the Bay.
So, Colin, by the way, I'm not sure. I mean, I think you guys are super famous in the Silicon Valley, one of the highest growth,
Infamous, famous, yeah.
Maybe you could just start with give maybe a little bit background about Zenefits for people who maybe don't know about the company.
Sure. So, Zenefits was started in early 2013, came to market at scale in 2014. The essential business model was an operating system for small business. Started by two co-founders, Parker Conrad and Lakshrini, both of whom were serial entrepreneurs, and in building the HR part of the business and or finding healthcare for their business, they found it was just an impossible task, paperwork, 9 different things, et cetera. So they streamlined all of that with a single platform, went to market, quickly went from 0 to 40,000 clients, scaled through 3 rounds of financing, of close to $568 million within the first 2 years. And then the company had a huge reset. Ultimately, on the broker side of the business, where we supported small businesses in purchasing their healthcare, we just scaled too fast. So reset the company, spent the last 1.5 to 2 years refocusing on being a platform, partnered on the operating part of the business, streamlined OpEx, and are now growing again at a sustainable rate. So this being my 3rd startup and going through these ebbs and flows, not new. This one had a little bit more of a spotlight on it than most, but it's been a fun ride.
But just awesome, It's like, in the healthcare space, we deal with a lot of companies that try to raise 50,000, 100,000, and you guys raising 500 million, on that type of growth path. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting in listening to the conversation today. And again, I started probably about 6 months before this reset. It will cause me to be very thoughtful around the amount of financing that and fundraising I do in the future around businesses. You have to really balance what you're getting for the dollar, how you're going to spend it, and then obviously what the commitment is around that. Because I think there's a tyrannical march towards growth that sometimes supersedes good judgment decision making.
That makes sense. So, Colin, one thing is I know the people in this space, right, one of the driving things about decreasing costs of healthcare.
Yeah.
Right, that's in the driving. Then we see one of the all over the news, right, is a major tech company, it's a Fortune 500, it's a Amazon, it's a Walmart. They come in and major thing. Do you think, they'll be successful, or do you think it will be more so make a splash, but really is not much will happen?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I think the short answer is what moves healthcare today, and somebody mentioned it in an earlier conversation, are the motivating levers, right? What forces an ecosystem where there's not a lot of motivation to change, whether it's the providers in areas or payers or even patients, and it's leverage. And ultimately what this model upmarket is proving for large employers is whether or not that leverage can be applied effectively in market to change the infrastructure and the paradigm of payers. So I hope it succeeds because it's the same premise that we're trying to achieve down market. If I asked you in the audience, how many, I should ask it this way, what percentage of the American working population works for companies of 500 or less employees? Anybody take a guess? 50%? Anybody else? 80%, yeah. 99.7%. 99.7% of the working population of the company works for companies of 500 and less. If you had to guess, what is the most underserved demographic of companies in the United States of America? Small business. So really what Zenefits did in coming to market and offering this technology to operate the company was, yeah, some great tech, but someone mentioned earlier, it's not about the tech, it's about the solving of a problem. And ultimately, it solved a problem for a very underserved part of the market, which aggregated small business. And if you aggregate enough small business, they're not small businesses anymore. They're one large pool of clients. And so we were able to leverage that in ways outside of healthcare, but in healthcare that allowed us to go back to really drive the industry to automate in this segment of healthcare that hadn't been automated. Medicare started automating years ago with private exchanges. Obamacare started the same trend in the under 65 market. Large group had always kind of been automated in the healthcare industry just based on, again, leverage. Small group never had. So Zenefits kind of by accident fell in a position to do some of that.
So if you were to take like all your customers, like all these small business, all group them together, could you actually, is there any regulatory limitation? Can you just make them one like super Amazon, super Walmart?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, we're in healthcare, so there's no regulation. Great news. No, kidding. Yeah, there's a little bit of that involved. What's interesting now is specifically, with, you guys familiar with the ACA, Affordable Care Act, and commoditized plans under 100, 150. So what's interesting now in market is if you look broadly, I'll ask you another just percentage question. How many small business, what percentage of total small business, around 6 million in the United States, how many offer healthcare today? Roughly. 10, 15% that actually do offer? 5%. Yeah, no, this one's a little higher. So it's around 52% offer, 48% don't. But it's still kind of halvesy. And you would think with that many employees pulled into that 99%, that's a lot of employees who are not covered and yet working a full-time job. So my point is, under ACA, that hasn't really moved the needle in terms of engaging and getting small businesses into healthcare. I think what we have an opportunity to look at now is, well, what outside of ACA products could lower the price point to get more of those companies in position to actually purchase healthcare? That's why today's conversation is so interesting to me, because there's an amalgam of non-ACA type healthcare that can be bundled together at a cheaper price point that's more accessible to the majority of small business out there. And that's really where I think the market's driving right now.
So do you have any example? I'm imagining like the CFO of a bunch of these companies that are like to look at how expensive healthcare, right? The price. Like, do you have examples of a company who did a great job, like in terms of decreasing cost of healthcare and still give something good for their employees? Like what are those guys doing it like that?
In the Fortune 500 world, I think General Motors, when it restructured, did a really good job of looking at their retiree and their active healthcare and understanding, how to restructure that. Use private exchanges. They got out of group plans, self-funded. Apple and some of the companies in the Valley doing a great job in terms of bringing healthcare on campus and using ASO type plans to get out of being levered into high premiums by healthcare companies. Small businesses don't have that same advantage. So what I've seen started to work really well is either trust-based products where you pull together a bunch of small businesses, which goes back to your comment on kind of how do you bring them together and leverage. That's one avenue that seemed to work well. There's a bunch of companies here in the Valley that are doing that well. The second is short-term medical and hospital indemnity plans. No reason for you to know what they are, but basically they're just skinny down healthcare plans, and they got a bad rap for a long time historically. They were plans that got sold on a corner in Florida with a street sign that said $8 for healthcare, and people paid for it. It was a disaster, and there are a lot of lawsuits brought. But those chassis, as a regulatory option by legitimate companies to go build some structure of benefits around that aren't fully ACA, but under the regulatory environment now, irrespective of your ideology, can come to market in a more responsible way, that's a great opportunity. Because I can buy a bronze ACA plan and I can wrap it with something else, or I can just buy a skinny down benefit, and it allows me to get in the game. And why is that important to entrepreneurs? Because you want to compete. You want to attract and retain talent. And outside of price point, that's the number 2 reason why small businesses consider healthcare at all. So.
How about like, we see like a bunch of these religious organizations, right? They create these for medical sharing. Kind of like, could that be a model applied to like employers?
Potentially. I haven't seen it applied that way. And again, I think what I've seen work well for small business is them understanding what the regulatory environment is today and looking for options that adjunct to that. That one may be a little bit far afield, but which is a great solution. I think it's how do I find something that either wraps around the current ACA or as a close alternative to that my employees will recognize as healthcare.
So like, from your position, you probably have the best view of like a lot of interesting insight on, healthcare for these employees. Is there a certain thing that you're seeing that is not covered by news? Like, what is something that we should learn from you?
We did a lot of market research recently to understand why small business did and didn't buy healthcare, and honestly, it was about 600 pages long. So let's start with page 1. I'm just kidding. But I think what came out of that is the cost trend, and bending the cost curve is not just about distribution and access through health insurance. That's one small portion of every dollar that's spent, but the trend overarchingly is insane. By 2028, somewhere around 48% of the median household income will be spent on premiums if the current trend continues. That's half of income. Today, the small business, 34 cents out of every dollar goes to benefits. That's a third of every dollar you make goes to benefits. That's insane. And when we get to 2028, if that curve continues, 21%, only 21% of that is picked up by the actual employee. 79% of that is picked up by the employer. So if you're a small business or an entrepreneur and you want to be competitive and you want to retain talent and you want to get in the game and have healthcare, and you're looking at that trend curve and that cost curve, that's pretty staggering. So maybe what I'd offer is we got to really focus on what you guys are talking about here today in terms of lowering the actual cost of care in conjunction with also what we try to do, which is distribution and access combined. If you look at the regulatory environment, only 15 to 20% or 20 cents on every dollar can be spent on selling health insurance or admin. The rest of it is cost of care, and that's what telehealth and a lot of what the discussion here today is including. So it's a twofold approach. I would just offer back, maybe you knew, maybe you didn't, but that trend is staggering.
So we're going to open this up to some audience. Any questions? Again, we're really honored to have Colin here. This is the world expert on all things.
I wanted to be here. World experts a lot.
Dr. Hurd? Okay.
So this is a crystal ball question. The advantage and disadvantage of telemedicine is it can handle remote problems. Obviously, the disadvantage is you cannot put hands on the patient. So is there any thinking about how we can access hands-on care remotely? You've got to sew up a cut. You've got to splint a wrist. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. Things you just obviously cannot do remotely. Is there any thinking out there about alliances, cooperatives, extending out the purview of telemedicine into the brick and mortar field on a limited basis so that those services can be provided within the walls of the telemedicine entity?
That's a great question. There's probably a lot of people here that could answer that better than I can. I mean, honestly, our world is really bringing small business together for the access of healthcare, not telemedicine specifically. I am sure that that's something that the industry is looking at. I know from our perspective, when small businesses approach, the biggest leap that they have to make in terms of considering telemedicine is what you're talking about. I have to somehow transition, I heard this earlier today, away from being in physical contact with the doctor to trusting that some sort of remote interaction is actually going to be able to solve my problem, which is, I think, what you're getting at. And I think that still exists, just anecdotally, in terms of how small businesses are thinking about this particular solution. I don't know in industry who's actually attacking that problem.
Hi, this is Rishi. How are you guys leveraging your scale to drive cost out of the system? Is that something you guys are focused on yet?
100%. The two ways that we're looking at that problem. Prior to Zenefits' existence, all interactions between small businesses and the health industry were paper-based. Someone put a fax up earlier. It was I'm kidding, not kidding, this is 5 years ago. Since then, there have been, with enough aggregation and demand back to the industry to change, like through Zenefits' model, APIs are now in place with major carriers. More are adopting, particularly on the ancillary side of the fence, but also on the health side of the fence. So that's one, just raw efficiency, manual entry, error, et cetera. Entering a form at a health carrier that is submitted by a small business is around $12 per form based on errors. If you do it via API, it's cents on the dollar. So just that in and of itself extracts complexity and inefficiency. On the other side of the fence, in terms of just cost of insurance, and when I say insurance, I don't think about traditional insurance. All insurance means to me is I get access to the system. That's it. It's access. So how do I lower the cost of access? And it goes back to what we were saying is how do you engage trust, pooled risk across a wide swath of small business to lower the cost of access? And we're spending a lot of time on that.
So are you guys thinking of going upstream in that business?
I think, it's a good question. We look at kind of 25 to 500 as kind of our sweet spot. And above that, you start to be able to play in a different world, right? Above that, you're talking about companies that have, particular bespoke insurance plans or technologies doesn't fit as well into the small business mantra that we try to aggregate. So 25 to 500 is probably where we'll play.
Got it. Thank you.
Colin, thank you so much for your honor here.
Thank you.
We would love to actually take our suite of all the audience member, combine all the interesting services together, create a complete service model from baby service to fertility to across the urgent care, across that maybe fund a few your Zenefits offer to American companies.
Yeah, done. Let's go.
Let's
Who's
go.
Who's got the plan?
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for the time. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.